Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube back with another Dark Shadows video for you guys and gals. I'm here to continue my failed marriages videos of Dark Shadows. So, if you've never watched Dark Shadows, you might be asking, what's with the videos? Why all the failed marriages in this show? Well, there's two answers. A, well, answer one, the writers wrote it this way. Um, but to go to the other side of the coin, if you grew up in the late 80s, early 90s, and you're aware of the word fairy tale or what fairy tale stories are, the fairy tales always have the happily ever after. When you look at Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella, those are stories that are fairy tales. Dark Shadows is nowhere near a fairy tale at all. It never becomes that story. It never becomes a happily ever after for really almost any character, including our buddy Barnabas. I mean, if the happiest is surviving the events, I guess you can count that, but I wouldn't. I mean, no offense. By surviving the events, I mean surviving the events that keep happening to you, that you live through it. But the people who you love around you, such as Angelique, Roxanne, Josette, they all die. Basically, every woman you've ever touched dies, therefore shredding the fairy tale. Again, there's no happily ever after really for Barnabas at all. I mean, I wouldn't be classifying the word alone as happily ever after. So the difference between these two characters and the characters I mentioned before, when you get into Elizabeth, when you get into Roger and her brother and sister, those two characters are from the beginning of the show. So when Elizabeth marries Paul Stoddard, you do hear Paul's name mentioned here or there. Not a lot, but he is mentioned even in the beginning episodes. When Roger marries Laura, David's mother is mentioned at the beginning of the show. Very little, but mentioned. So when you get into Jeremiah and Josette, they are mentioned at the beginning of the show. The characters I mentioned, they were mentioned enough or they were shown. Liz, Roger were shown. Uh, Laura was eventually shown. But she was mentioned though too. Her David's mother, as they call her. Paul Stoddard was mentioned. Josette and Jeremiah were mentioned, and you see Josette's ghost. Barnabas is not mentioned at the beginning of the series because he's not a character yet. In fact, the first time you see his portrait is episode 205. And when a character comes out of the coffin, because Barnabas is a vampire, it's episode 211. Now, is there build up to Barnabas? Yes. Is there build up to Angelique? I would say no, not enough build up. Um, the most build up you get, there's an episode of Dark Shadows where Dr. Julia Hoffman is in the Collins family mausoleum. It's a set, obviously. She sees the ghost of Sarah Collins, who is Barnabas' sister. The mausoleum door locks on her. You hear a woman weeping, and you hear a wicked woman laughing. This is your tease that there's a witch on the show, and it's not much of one. It's not much of a tease. And I'm not knocking Dark Shadows for that, but that is the case here. There's not much of a build to Angelique. So when the character finally makes her debut, it's a black and white episode. Sam Hall's the writer. I think it's 368, 369, if I'm not mistaken, where she makes her debut. And you literally have the character getting put over in that episode. Um, I'll have to double check, but on the episode number, but the character gets put over very quickly. Now, I will say that a lot of the things happen with Angelique, and I mentioned a lot of the things that happened in the Jeremiah Josette marriage, so I'm not going to rehash everything here. But the most important thing that happens to me is you can tell that Barnabas and Angelique had a relationship prior to him ever getting married, and I don't mean just they kissed. I mean the characters had sex. Um, Barnabas goes to Angelique's room. He goes to uh, her servants' quarters, and they kiss. There's no spell cast on Barnabas. There are things that Angelique does, and I mentioned those things before. Now, the biggest thing I would say too that happens prior to the wedding is Angelique being buried alive, being buried alive by Jeremiah, uh, the zombie Jeremiah, who she did summon out of the ground with her powers, but now can't control for some reason because she's getting married or she is, and she summons Ben, who's been helping her because she has him under a spell to dig her out of the coffin that she is buried in. She's buried alive. Um, he does help her. So Barnabas, who is married to, because and the reason Barnabas marries Angelique, you're asking, it's real simple. Angelique has caused Sarah to get really ill by sticking the pins, and uh, Angelique says about a special remedy. If she cures Sarah, will Barnabas marry her? Uh, Barnabas gives his word he will if she can cure Sarah. She pulls the pins out the doll, and Sarah is cured. Um, and yeah, he agrees to marry her. Joshua is against the marriage. He's not. He doesn't even show up for it. That's Barnabas's dad. Naomi, who is Barnabas's mother, does. And her wedding gift to them after they are married is the old house. The old house is actually owned in her name, and she gives it to them as a wedding present. She's the only person that is. She's been the nicest person to Angelique. So John and Barnabas's family. And no, I'm not including Barnabas in this conversation because I mean Barnabas is basically marrying her because he gave his word. Um, so where do things go south? Well, Reverend Trask has been hunting Victoria Winters because he feels she's a witch. Barnabas is hiding her in the old house. Angelique finds out about it. She's not happy necessarily with this. So you literally have jo- Joshua goes to Barnabas because he's being hounded by Abigail to let Reverend Trask perform this exorcism. And really, what you have go on is Joshua just talking, like, let him do it. Come on, let him get this over with, so we can just not be bothered by this idiot anymore. Basically, is the conversation. Barnabas really doesn't want to do it because he doesn't. Well, hey, it's my house. Why should I even worry about this? This doesn't bother me. Um, but he lets his dad talk him into it, and so he does let Trask perform the exorcism. Trask lights these two sticks. There's a circle, and he starts saying about the witch and stuff. Meanwhile, Victoria Winters is in her room. Angelique is in her servant's quarters. She's not in her and Barnabas's bedroom. And you have this moment where Angelique is performing a spell where there are flames, but they're not actually burning her. The flames are actually cold. Um, it's a weird spell. She's using tarot cards and stuff. And Barnabas is actually walking around the old house inside of it, and he passes Angelique's servant's quarters and he hears her. And he's like, Angelique? Like, he's not sure. Like, was that her? It sounded like her. And Victoria starts screaming. She runs out her room because it's on. She thinks it's on fire, and she runs down the stairs out of the old house into Reverend Trask's arms. Victoria is arrested. This is where Barnabas starts to get suspicious of Angelique. This is his, okay, there's something going on with the woman I married here. Ben is eventually arrested by, know, Joshua throws him in jail at Collinwood at the Great House. And they feel Ben has lost his mind. Ben has lost his way, if you will, too. Barnabas goes to Ben feeling he knows who the witch is. He feels Ben knows. And that Ben wanted to say. Well, he says to Ben, well, tell me who the witch is. I know you know. And he goes, I can't. I can't tell you. Every time she put a spell on me, if I try to speak her name, I won't. He goes, Ben, I taught you to write her initial, write her first, you know, of her name. At first, the way they do this, he does V. Now, keep in mind, Barnabas already kind of figures Angelique is the witch. So Barnabas is kind of playing along. He says V for Victoria Winters. Then you see Ben Stokes take his finger and cross it, meaning A. Barnabas says A for Angelique. Barnabas gets knocked unconscious here by Ben as Ben escapes. So much friendship, right? Oh, they are friends, actually. So we have a very interesting dynamic. Barnabas goes to stab Angelique. She stops him dead cold because she herself is grown suspicious of him. Um, and she goes, "You really hate me that much?" And he says, "Look, why did you do all this? You've done all these horrible things. Because I love you, Barnabas." And that's her explanation, basically. Barnabas still wants to be rid of Angelique, so he brings down the flintlock pistols, the ones he dueled with Jeremiah with, and one of them is loaded. And Angelique has the doll that she was putting the pins in for Sarah. I My biggest question here would be in this episode is, did it even work? Because we saw Angelique's magic kind of working against her in the episode, the way the writers wrote it. So the question is, was Angelique's magic really working here? Is she sticking the pins in the doll trying to kill Sarah? Barnabas shoots her before she can put the pin in the doll's heart that would have killed Sarah. Uh, Angelique is wounded in the shoulder. She thinks she's dying. I mean, gangrene is a thing. So she curses him, and anybody who loves him will die. Or he'll Bat crashes through the window, bites Barnabas after Angelique passes out. They're both out cold. Ben stumbles upon the bodies. Um, Angelique comes to. You have a very interesting, you know, you have Barnabas who is going to die. I mean, that's where this is leading. Barnabas is going to turn into a vampire. Angelique knows what's going to happen. She try to again. Angelique can't stop this with her powers, and it's like you start to wonder with what are the writers really doing here, other than killing Barnabas to turn him into a vampire. But more on the flip side of that coin, with Angelique, here's a woman who couldn't control a zombie, who now can't control her powers to cure Barnabas. Yes, the writer's writing it this way, but if you go to the other side of the coin of the story, you kind of wonder, well, has she lost her powers because she got married under the eyes of God? I mean, because this woman is using powers. Uh, so maybe she's being punished. And maybe the devil's like, nope, you took the vows of marriage. Nope, you don't get your magic powers. Now, she is going to have her magic powers eventually back after she gets killed off by Barnabas. Barnabas dies. Before Barnabas does die, Josette, Naomi, Joshua, they all know uh, they're all grief stricken by this, that he dies. And you have this, his coffin is carried to the mausoleum. They don't know he's a vampire. Angelique does. I love the fact that Joshua is all business here. And by all business, I mean he's basically giving Angelique money. Here, just take this and leave. Get the hell out of here. He doesn't want her around. He never liked her. He didn't want her a part of his family. And if you feel Joshua sounds like a cold hearted son of a bitch, you would not be wrong. He is a cold hearted son of a bitch. Joshua Collins, played by actor Lewis Edmonds, this is the meanest character he's played on the show thus far. Now he's going to play meaner later, obviously, but Brutus Collins. But this right here, Joshua, is very, very mean. Angelique goes to stake Barnabas. Ben is, you know, there. He can't bring himself to do this or watch this be done. Angelique, Barnabas wakes up and strangles Angelique to death. Basically, telling her, "Oh, your curse came back to bite you." You know, literally. Not well, not too literally, but she gets strangled to death. They bury Angelique. They being Barnabas and Ben is going to now help Barnabas. And you know, does this sort of fiasco continue with Barnabas and Angelique? And by fiasco, I mean, does Angelique come back? And the answer is yes. Um, Angelique appears at Victoria Winter's trial because again, she's a witch. She's Is she free of the marriage? No, no, she's not free of the marriage. So she dies and she comes back because she's a witch. Um, she's got magical powers suddenly again, right? Maybe the devil's not so mad at her after all. I will say that that is the weirdest part about all this when you think about it, with the storytelling of that the writers are presenting. Because really, what the writers are really doing by having Angelique sort of lose control of her powers is they're telling the other side of that story. Like, okay, for every yin, there's a yang. For every action, there's a reaction. Her action is getting married to Barnabas because she wanted this, but the reaction to the underworld, or if you will, the devil, is, hey, you just took the vows under God's house. That's a no no. That's a huge no no. So you have that aspect, and the writers are kind of hinting that, I think, in a lot of ways. Um, Really, the place they really sort of kick this in the gear is Nicholas Blair. I feel, but I'll get into that when I get into Roger or Cassandra. Um, you know, Barnabas and Angelique as characters. I mean, clearly, you know, they butt heads because of everything Angelique's done. And many people say, well, Team Angelique, Team Barnabas. And I'll say this right now, and I'll always say this, they're on the same damn team. Um, Barnabas, pre 1795 did a lot of awful shit as a character. Angelique in 1795 and afterwards did a lot of awful shit. It kind of balances out when you think about the two characters in question. Um, so I'm not really. I'm more. They're on the same team in a lot of ways, and by that I mean that they've both done so many bad things. It's kind of hard to like tip the scale in one person's favor of who did the worst shit ever. Literally, I mean that. So, um, it's just the way the characters were written. I mean, you do. If you take anything away from Barnabas and Angelique as characters and the people who played them, first of all, as characters, they're huge. We know how important Barnabas is by this point in time. And, they've given him now an origin story, but his origin story doesn't just include him and his family. It includes a woman who he did marry, who was a witch, and now you have a bigger, expanded universe by that logic and rule for the writers to play with. Okay, we've introduced Angelique, we've done stuff with her. What else can we do with her? And they're going to do a lot of stuff with her. So she's not done yet, folks. She's not done yet. Um, again, you just got to understand that this show, it's no fairy tale. There really is not a happily ever after with these characters in a sense. Um, you know, marriages do not last long for Colin's family members. Um, Hope you enjoyed this video. You guys have a great night.